Welcome to South Carolina, the state your parents warned you about. I'm just kidding. We willingly left California over 8 years ago and moved to South Carolina, and we absolutely loved it. But we learned there's some things that you don't want to do and things you don't want to assume here in South Carolina. That's right. If you are considering relocating to South Carolina, specifically the midlands of South Carolina, where we are, Lexington, Columbia, and Lake Murray, there's things you need to consider, especially if you're relocating from a larger area like we were. Now, some of these may be common for some of you, but others, I promise you, are gonna take you by surprise. And some of these first ones you may have already had a realization of, but as we go further, the deeper it gets into these things, I promise you, you don't want to assume it, and a lot of people do. I mean, I literally help people relocating from all over the country, so that's why we have to tackle all aspects of this. Don't assume you're gonna have public water and sewer. For those that are used to city water and sewer, if you stick close to town, you will most likely be okay. But oftentimes when you leave town, or even some of the older homes in town, you'll find that they don't have public water or public sewer. They're dependent on septic or well. Now I always say this isn't a bad thing. I mean, I've had clients that would never pay for public water and sewer. They love the idea of well water and the cost of savings on septic because we do pay for sewer here. But of course, those that are used to the suburban life or watch Christmas Vacation one too many times and get freaked out over the idea of every time they flush the toilet, sit in their backyard, waiting to explode out through the grass. This isn't the dream for them. And again, it's not across the board in all areas, but oftentimes I have people reach out that are looking in the more rural areas, or they're seeking out some of those new homes that are on larger lots. And let me give you a little hint. So when new construction builds a lower budget house, they don't tend to have larger lots, obviously to save on costs. But when you have a septic tank, there's a minimum required lot size. So if you happen to see a house out in the country that's new construction, it's a really good price, and it has this large lot, that may be the case why. So don't always assume that you're gonna have that public water and sewer if you start venturing out into the country. Of course, as I said, this isn't across the board. I will say a majority of the homes I show do have public water and sewer. And this is again where we can come in. We can help you locate those areas that suit what you're looking for, whether it is the public utilities or not. And for those that don't know who I am, my name is Brandon. My team and I of local real estate agents have been helping people relocate from all over the country. So don't hesitate to reach out. That way you don't have to go at this alone. So let me break down the area to you so you can kind of know where it gets ruled. So either way, this is kind of our general area that we cover. And looking at it here, it's kind of downtown Lexington here. So basically heading to the west, basically this section right here where you see Summer, Gilbert, Murray, this is pretty rural here. Once you kind of cross this line here. So you have a lot in downtown Lexington that kind of picks up a little bit downtown Batesburg, Leesville, but then is rural pretty much around that. Heading south, as you head past Red Bank, once you pass Red Bank out here, Gaston, Edmond, even going down to Pillion, Swansea, all those is very rural that way. On the north side, kind of once you pass Chapin up here, heading out towards Little Mountain, Prosperity, that's pretty rural out that direction. Heading up this way on the east side, Blythewood is kind of the tail end of it. Once you pass Blythewood, gets pretty rural that way. Heading out this way, you got a little bit in Elgin, then it picks back up in Lugoff. You got a downtown there as well as Camden, but pretty much all around it is going to be relatively rural up there. Heading to the south down this direction, pretty much once you leave the downtown area down here, heading out towards like Hopkins, Eastover, all that is very rural down this direction. So hopefully that gives you a better perspective of the quote unquote rural areas. Don't try and stick to the man if you live in an HOA neighborhood. Understand that if you choose to live in an HOA neighborhood in the state of South Carolina, they can and will foreclose on your house. That's right. This is something that's new to a lot of people, that HOAs have that right to do that. Now, I've always said this is very dependent on where you're coming from. Us coming from California, I felt that the HOAs here are pretty moderate with their rules. But some people can't stand the concept of someone telling them what they can do with their house. Who's to tell me whether or not I can put above ground pool, what type of fence I can have? If that's you, don't move into an HOA. It's the easiest way to put it. I live in an HOA neighborhood myself, and there's people in our Facebook group that are like, I can't believe this HOA. Well, you chose to live, like you sign with the attorney that there is an HOA in this neighborhood, and every attorney I work with with says they can and will foreclose on your house. So that's why I say if you don't like the concept of HOAs, and of course we do have neighborhoods that don't, then don't live in an HOA neighborhood because they can take your house. Of course, I always tell people, this is a double-edged sword. Those that are used to more rural living understand this. There's a reason for HOAs, and those of us that live in them and like them for a reason. Because I always tell people, while you may not want an HOA, neither does your neighbor. And unfortunately, I've shown houses here in the Midlands, and their house was phenomenal in a non-HOA, but their neighbor didn't care about their house as much as they per se did. And obviously that can impact the values of your house. Again, I'm not here to tell you which direction you should go, whether you choose an HOA neighborhood or not. But I always just share the pros and cons of both sides so you understand. And obviously, like I said, if you choose to live in an HOA neighborhood, make sure you're following the rules. Don't assume that every road is gonna have street lights on it. If you drive some of these back roads, they can be ridiculously dark. I mean, I personally have an astigmatism, and driving at night has always been a challenge, but I lived 20 years of my life before I ever had to put a pair of glasses or contacts on, and it started just being at nighttime. And the reason I bring this up is because when I first moved here, I was not used to this. We lived in a more suburban town where there were lights just about everywhere. Unless you ventured really far out into the country, lights were everywhere. We're here, so going backwards, before I was in real estate, I was an EMT and I was working night shift. And I remember working night shift, trying to drive the ambulance, and we had these older ambulances that the lights weren't that great and I could hardly see the road. And it was quickly like, well, guess I gotta wear my glasses all the time, where it used to be an as needed thing. And so that's why I challenge you, if you don't have great eyes or you have trouble seeing at night, there's gonna be areas that are difficult. And I promise you, this isn't just the rural areas out and about. You can be right there in the town, and a couple minutes out of town, all of a sudden it's a 2-lane road with dark, no lights, nothing like that. And so make sure your headlights are working, make sure you have your glasses if you struggle this. With that said, continuing on about that, don't ignore deer signs. I've talked about in other videos, this is one of my biggest fears and something I never expected. I can't tell you how many times I've been driving down the interstate and you see a deer dart out in front of your car. And you'll often be driving down the interstate and you'll see the deers on the side of the road and obviously hit by cars. And so be cognizant of that. This is the best way I put it, because you will see deer run out in the road, and if you're not prepared, I knock on wood, I haven't personally hit one, but I've definitely had them run out, and I've had to, make those moves to not crash, because of course that's the other thing. You see, swerve off the road to miss the deer, right? But either way. Next, don't worry about your junk. What do I mean by that? So truly, I learned in South Carolina, one man's junk is another man's treasure. That's right. I've realized here, you can sell just about anything on Facebook Marketplace. I've had clients that have moved from other areas and they were talking about how they were downsizing and they had to go take all this stuff to the dump to get rid of. And I was like, why? And they're like, well, I don't know, we put it on Facebook Marketplace and no one would buy it. I was like, people would be jumping over the stuff you were selling. I mean, I've sold old used couches that were not in great condition, but the lady that picked it up is like, I'm using it for my dog, it's perfect. I've literally sold broken, not hidden, advertised, this washer dryer is broken. People were jumping up and down for it, and some guy literally came, picked the thing up, the dryer up, walked over, threw it in his truck, gave me the money, and took off gladly. That's right. I don't know what they're doing with this stuff, if they're flipping it, using it for parts or whatever, but I'm telling you, one man's junk is another man's treasure. I've seen some crazy things listed on Facebook Marketplace that I'm like, okay, I guess you can sell everything as well. With that said, this was a cool thing to us, and for some of you, I know, get excited about this. The dump here in the counties are free. What do I mean by that? So with Lexington County, Richland County, they have county dump sites that you can go to for free and go dump your stuff. And I'm not talking about just your trash, because you will see people that do that, they take their trash there, but I'm talking about, used oil, broken lawnmowers. I mean, I've seen people put broken couches in there, all kinds of things. So if you can't sell it on Facebook Marketplace, the good thing is if you're going to the dump as a resident, I'm not talking about commercial stuff, right? If you're going to the dump as a resident and you live in that county, you can go dump that stuff for free. Again, I knew where we were in California, for a lot of people, the reason I bring this up is because you had to go into the actual dump, they would weigh your truck, and based on the weight of it, you had to pay. Here, you don't do that. You as a resident going to dump the random thing that you don't need anymore, you can do that here and it doesn't cost you anything. Outside, because like I said, it's per county, so it's in your taxes. I guess prepaid is the best way I've been told to put it. Don't assume reliable internet. Again, this dives into those that are looking to be in the more rural settings. With many people working from home, this is super critical. I get a lot of calls from people that dream of going out to the country, away from the suburbs and the cities, and they want to get off the grid. But that comes with a trade-off. You're off the grid. Well, typically you can find internet providers like Spectrum, AT&T, Carolina Connect, all around the town areas, close to everything. Those that tend to venture out may find random internet providers in some areas, but they're not as reliable as they would hope, especially those that are like, well, I need fiber. And I'm like, well, you're not gonna get fiber out in the country, I hate to tell you. And so if you're dependent on it, make sure that you're checking those provider maps, because like I said, again, we can help you, as most of the areas around town, you're not gonna have an issue with this. It's as you start to venture out. And to be 100% honest, some of these areas you venture out, you may lose cell phone service as well. So again, I understand the dream of getting out of the suburbs and the HOAs and the towns, but there's a trade-off with that you need to understand. And a lot of those people tend to be the ones that work from home, and so they can do that, but keep that in mind. So before we move on to one of the biggest one that catches a lot of people off guard, I recommend don't isolate. Get connected. So one of the questions I get from people relocating is they get concerned about leaving their family and friends behind. I mean, I personally went through this, right? Some of you have your family coming with you, which is awesome. But those that don't, that are moving away from them, wonder if they'll ever really be able to reconnect and create what they had back home, right? My kids had all these friends and we had these neighborhood groups and people we would go to church with and do all these things. Of course, this is such a personal question, but I challenge you to get connected with your community. Sure, early on when we moved into our house, we had neighbors that knocked on our door, offered to make us homemade bread, invite us to block parties and more, but this isn't always the case. So a lot of people want to sit at home waiting for someone to come knock on their door. I challenge you, get out and about. When you do that, we've found it relatively easy to get connected with people. And I mean, there's so many ways to do this, and we'll dive into it more. You know, community events, concerts, going to the different parks, churches is another big one people get connected at. Those neighborhood block parties, in some of these neighborhoods you'll see they do food truck events. These are great ways to get connected with your community, and you'll see in some of these neighborhoods, we were recently at one of my friend's neighborhood pools, and the neighbors all got together and we're doing a community cornhole challenge contest, whatever you want to call it, and they had neighborhood shirts and all these things. So that's why I say it's out there, but you got to first put yourself out there. Again, you may get that neighborhood where someone comes and knocks on your door and says, hey neighbor, nice to meet you, we're doing some this weekend. But I know it's not always the case, but if you put yourself out there, you can get connected to these things relatively quickly, is what we found. Don't miss out on all the local events. I know we were guilty of this early on. We didn't think much of them, and we spent most of our days off traveling the state. You know, we'd go down to Myrtle Beach, Hilton Head, up to Asheville, Greenville, all these different areas. But we finally started giving them a try. And whether it was the Soda City Market in Columbia, concerts at the Ice House Amphitheater, which wasn't first here when we moved here, but you get the point, rodeos in Camden, line dancing at Carolina Western Pub, Fireflies baseball games, University of South Carolina Gamecocks football games, drive-in movies at the Big Mo in Monetta, festivals like the Greek Festival, the Irmo Ochre Strut, Gilbert Peach Festival, and so many more, or visiting places like the local zoos, Riverwalk, Saluda Shoals Park, Adora Farms Wildlife Safari Park, or even renting a boat on Lake Murray. I mean, I could go on. So many people relocating from our large areas feel like the area is lacking, but a lot of times I realize it's because they haven't taken the time to truly explore it all. I mean, there's so much out there that we haven't even explored ourselves, and I learn more and more about it every day from getting connected with locals. Some of these things I didn't know about, right? They're not as advertised, and you get connected with locals and like, hey, have you been down to whatever that may be? And so finally we check it out and it's like, oh my gosh, how do we not know about this? Don't assume everything is cheap. This is probably the biggest assumption that I hear from people. I mean, I get calls from people looking for homes on the lake for $300,000, acres of land for $10,000, $100,000 or that dream house for $250,000. And plenty show up and they're surprised that their money doesn't go as far as they thought it would. I mean, you may have seen this in the comments. I post a video of a home, a neighborhood, and share the price, and people post that it's overpriced, yet the home sells in a day, so clearly it was not. And I often hear people tell me that they're just not seeing homes on the market in the area that they're looking. And I often look at their home search, and while there are homes that match their criteria, they're just a lot higher in budget than what they're currently looking at. While yes, our average price is less than the national average, that doesn't mean everything is cheap. I mean, I just did a video covering Lake Murray recently, but I can tell you right now making this video, there's not a single family home active on the lake with its own dock on the Lexington, Irmo, and Chapin side of the lake listed for under $550,000. And that's the starting price. And it's a 1900 3-bed home that for a lot of you probably say can use some upgrades. And this goes all the way up to $3.25 million. And the average on that side of the lake is about $1.3 million. And even on the rural side, Newberry, Saluda going out where there's less stuff, the lowest price single family home I could find is a 940 square foot home for $390,000. Again, off the lake, let's talk about that land dream that so many people have. I looked at active plots around 10 acres because that seems to be the number a lot of people throw out. And even out in the country, they run from about 7,000 an acre up to around 50,000 acre for non-commercial. We're talking about residential where you're gonna put a home at. But the median land's right around 15,000 an acre to give you an idea. And to be 100% honest, I've shown a decent amount of land during my time, and many of these still have a lot of prep work before you can even put a house on it. I mean, I've had people call that say, hey, I need a piece of land, this 10 acres, needs to have 4 wells, septic tanks set up so my family can build our family compound. But most of these I show, the land hasn't been cleared, the topography needs some work in some of them, and it hasn't been perked for septic and well. And again, in the future, I'll make an entire video about this process to help people understand this, because I think a lot of times they don't understand everything that comes into taking a piece of land and building a home on all the costs associated. They obviously have this dream of doing it. And so I'll dive into that further. People do this, don't get me wrong, but I think the cost is a little more than people expect. And look, I get it. I moved here in 2015 and I paid $150,000 for a right around 2,000 square foot house in a neighborhood on public water and sewer, 5 minutes from a Walmart, Lowe's, and more. But I just read a stat that over the last 4 years, South Carolina home prices have raised 60%. That's right, 60%. And I know many are sitting on the sidelines hoping that for a crash. They're like, yep, that's too much. It's gonna crash, it's too high, it's inflated. But the problem is more and more people are relocating here every day. And inventory still struggles. If you've watched any of my market reports, you know I talk about that. And so while that price increase that we've seen over the last 4 years may have slowed down, as we're probably right around the 5% mark year over year now, it doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. Again, our average price is lower than the national average, but again, I tell people time and time again, don't forget, that's the cost for the average home. And one last bonus that for those that stick around, and I've talked about this in so many videos, but I continue to bring it up because it's something that people assume and it surprises them, is vehicle property taxes. We pay property taxes on our vehicle just like you pay property tax on your houses every single year. I'm not talking about sales tax. This is different, which the positive for that is they enacted a transfer fee when you move to the state. A lot of people call it a northerner tax. And so essentially when you first move to the state and you're gonna have to register your vehicle and pay your property taxes on that vehicle, there's a one-time fee that you have to pay for that first time registering in the state. When they did that, they put a cap on sales tax when you buy a new vehicle. So when you go to the dealership and buy a new vehicle, there's a cap on how much you'll pay on sales tax. So you're saving on that accord. But with that said, again, every single year you're gonna get a tax bill from your local county to pay taxes on that vehicle. Again, I bring this up so often and yet so many people are taken back by this and surprised. And this goes back to the cost of living things. Yes, you know, there are certain things that are less here. The average home price is less. Yes, the average property taxes on our house are less. Yet there are some things that, to be honest, are more. Now, obviously this is dependent where you're coming from. from. For most of us coming from California, everything was less. But insurance, they say, vehicle insurance is a little bit higher here. Again, we save money, so this is all perspective. Homeowners insurance, I will say, is pretty average. I get asked this a lot, especially because I got a lot of people coming from Florida and from the coast that are having troubles with homeowners insurance. We haven't had that issue here because we don't have as many floodplains. We don't have as many, knock on wood, natural disasters as they do on the coast. And so we haven't run into that issue. But again, there are costs associated that people don't take into consideration. Again, the biggest to not do is don't try and go at this alone. I mean, when we first moved here, we didn't have much guidance. There wasn't all these YouTube videos like I'm making here guiding people about the area. It felt like we were literally throwing a dart at the map based off of a couple Google searches, and it stuck. And I know how stressful that can feel. And so that's again where we come in and help guide you. And I even made this playlist here where it breaks down all the areas around the Midlands of South Carolina. That way you can hopefully narrow this down even more to learn which area best suits the needs that you're looking for. And I dive into some of those things we talked about. Is it a rural area? Is there more shopping? Is those things? So don't, again, assume all these things. Get connected with us and check out this playlist to learn a little bit more about those different areas.